I've been hooked on this sub since I came across it a few weeks ago. I finally had the time to post my story here. It's probably not as crazy as others, but still pretty scary. Backstory. I was a senior in high school, 2014, female. I had just turned 17 3 months prior due to starting kindergarten early because of my birthday in the state I lived in at the time. Point is, I was young. My dad had just unexpectedly passed away a week before this incident. This Friday was my first day back at school. And yes, my mother made me come back to school less than a week after I found my dad dead of a heart attack. So I totally wasn't ready for it, more like forced to act normal. I do think this played a big part in my reaction. I went to Votech. For those who don't know, I had half of my day devoted to a specific trade, cutting my actual time in high school classes in half. After lunch, all the tech students would get on the buses to be driven to tech. I was one of the few who were allowed to drive to tech because I had a job that sometimes started at the end of my school day and was allowed to leave early to go to work. Now for the story. It's a semi-normal day, even though I just went through the most traumatic event of my life a week ago. Teachers were sent an email of what had happened with my dad. Fellow students ended up finding out. Everywhere I went in school, I was asked why I was even there. Was I okay? Do I need to go home? Blah blah. I was pretty much emotionless after spending a whole week crying. I was just over it and wanted to get through the day. After lunch, I get in my car and head to tech. I enjoyed tech a lot. I was actually looking forward to it. Now, tech is less than 15 minutes away from my school. Not a long trip at all. I'm down the road and someone in front of me stops to turn and I notice the car behind me. An older Ford Taurus swaying something out of the driver window. He's an old man, alone. I assume he's just waving something with the music and pay no mind. A little further down the road, someone else in front of me stops to turn. We're at a dead stop, waiting for the other lane to clear so guy ahead can cross. I had my window down as it was a pretty nice day. I then noticed the guy behind me. He was staring at me through my rearview mirror, pointing previous objects at me, lunging it, and yelling out the window at me. "You fucking cunt, don't you know how to drive?" I'm instantly like, okay, this is weird. I'm just waiting for this guy to turn. I know I didn't do any stupid driving previously. I'm like, what the fuck? And roll my window up. My school is less than 3 minutes away at this point. I'm still being a little paranoid and looking in my rearview mirror at this guy, heading down the road. I then see him take the object, that I still can't see well enough to figure out what it is, and take it across his throat as if he's slicing it, and then pointing it at me. He's also accelerating, riding my ass, and then backing off. My heart starts racing because I know this guy isn't joking at this point. I figured that once I turned into tech, he would keep on driving. Just a crazy case of road rage. I'm still scared though. I turn into tech and pull forward into a spot. The guy whips in and parks directly behind me. I notice some other students in the car beside me getting their books together, and I signal to them to stay in their car. I get, "What the fuck?" looks from them. I mouth that I don't know and to lock the door. Crazy old guy then comes up to my window with a fucking knife. That's what he was waving out the window this whole time at me. A huge Swiss Army knife. I have no idea how I did not notice that it was a knife. His face got so close to my window. His eyes were squinted and bloodshot. He had curly white hair with glasses. He was about 70 years old, but a pretty bulky guy. He truly looked scary and pissed. He told me to open my door and started trying to open the door when I shook my head no. He then takes the knife and scratches a big X on my window, right where my face would be from his point of view. Then he pressed his hands against my window and pulled my window down a few inches. I am really freaked out now. The window was only open about 2 to 3 inches due to my rain guards, but I was still scared. I took my seatbelt off and started backing away from the window, but didn't want to get out of my seat so this guy could chase me around the inside of my car. He then sticks the knife in my window inches from my face. I can't roll the window back up. He keeps screaming that he's going to slit my throat like babies and children and their mothers in Vietnam, and how I'm just a stupid little whore that needs to know her place, and other crazy, deranged things like this. I'm truly scared now and still backing away as far as I can in my seat from the knife, but in a way, after what I just went through, I started to just not care. In my mind, he wanted a reaction, and I wasn't going to give him one. I eventually just started saying, "Do it, slit my fucking throat. Come on, come get me, is that what you want?" With the straightest, most unemotional face I can muster up. At this point, he's getting confused. He's still wielding the knife at me, but it's only 5 to 6 inches away from my face. He can't get his arm in my window any farther. He's still shouting about how much of a whore I am, how he's going to kill me and make me pay. I stare at him for a while with no reaction to what he's saying. I think he realized that whatever he wanted to happen wasn't going to happen. He took his arm out of my window saying he'll find me. He's still going to kill me. He knows where me and my slut mother live and how he knows how many dicks I've sucked. He walks back to his car and speeds off, hitting a student's car in the process. It took me a few seconds to come back to reality. The girls in the car beside me look at me like, what the fuck? All the students that arrived when I did stayed in their cars and then realized what was happening. I got out of my car and so did everyone else. The students rushed over to me, apologizing, saying they were too scared to do anything when they saw he had a knife. I didn't blame them, really. That's what I wanted them to do. While this was happening, one of them phoned Tech's principal to tell them what was going on. Tech called the police and they took my statement. The cops kept asking me if I had cut this guy off, brake checked him, did I know him, etc. I said no, I didn't do anything to him, and I've never seen him before. Tech had no cameras. I do realize that maybe my reaction was bad. I have people tell me that I should have put my Jeep in drive and ran him over, or just left the school completely. I think after what I just went through with my dad, I didn't want to see any more death, even though this guy actually did something to me. I didn't want him to target other students if I left. I also was not allowed to have a weapon myself, being on school grounds, not even a can of mace. Tech ended up letting me go home. A few news outlets wanted to interview me, but I had just had enough. They still did run a story without me that night. 2 days passed, it's now Sunday. The cops call me and say the guy has turned himself in because he saw the story on the news. It turns out that he was a Vietnam veteran, and when the police went to his house, he had a shrine for the war, a whole room with stuff. We go to court. They say that because he's a vet, that he had a flashback and was temporarily delusional. He has to complete an ARD program, stay 599 feet away from me at all times, and pay for my scratched window. I'm pretty upset by the verdict. I do respect veterans to every extent, but you can't be on the road if you're doing stuff like this to innocent people. I still do see him around at the store, gas station, etc. I'm not sure if he remembers me or not. Every time he looks at me, but not like he knows me, just how you glance at any other person. I do feel bad for him. He didn't deserve what the war did to him, but I also didn't deserve what he did to me. I hope one day he overcomes the trauma like I have. It's made me a paranoid driver that checks the rearview mirror a little too often, and I get scared when someone follows me for too long. I now have a concealed carry permit with a gun, knife, and mace in my car at all times. I'm overcoming it. Thanks for reading. First time poster. Hope this fits here. I've got to preface this a bit with my father's background. I feel like it explains things pretty well. Kind of. My dad's side of the family are pretty damn country. My grandfather was a retired gunsmith. My dad played football all through high school, and when he wasn't doing that, he was hunting and fishing. I grew up used to the fact that my dad did things the country way. He went to feed stores and got vaccinations for all of our dogs and administered them himself. When they got too old to eat, he put them down and dug the graves himself. When his arch-fucking nemesis shot up our house, he took justice into his own hands, or attempted to. My dad's first company was a pretty successful fire safety company in the area, until his best friend/co-owner ran off with all the clients. This left my family with nothing. We were very, very poor and had to relocate 300 miles away to live with his parents. This should have been the last we'd heard of his old best friend, but evil never dies or whatever. Flash forward 11 years. We've been living in a small town south of Dallas for about 6 years now, and things were okay. We were still poor, just not as poor. But we were living in a house again, and the business was doing well, so things were good. That is until Jimmy Ray Jr. showed up. Jimmy was the eldest son of the dirtbag who fucked over my dad, and he came to us, asking for a job so he could get away from his shitty father. He had a wife and baby on the way, and he just had to get out from under the thumb of his father. My dad has a thing for taking in strays, so soon Jimmy was working for my dad. Now, Jimmy was a real fucking creep. He just used to hit on me constantly, going so far as to pull me on his lap as often as he could, and delighted in asking me if certain things turned me on. I hated him and told my parents this constantly. They wouldn't believe that Jimmy was a bad guy. But then things started getting really weird. We lived just outside city limits at the time, and there was always a lot of space between you and your neighbors. This meant that lots of activity could go on and they probably wouldn't notice. This also meant that the truck parked down the street all day, every day, was actually pretty visible to us. At first, we thought the old couple down the bend had purchased a new truck and maybe there just wasn't enough space in their driveway, until my mom drove by on her way back from groceries and saw a man in the truck with binoculars on his lap. This continued for weeks until one day the truck just wasn't there anymore. And then other stuff started. It was a Monday night and everyone was knocked out. My dad had work, mom had work, and my two brothers and I had school the next day. Imagine the terror when the back door sounds like someone is going at it with a battering ram. Riley, the oldest of my two brothers, was first to jump up. I was next. Despite having the room furthest away from the living room, the door was pushed in, being held by the chain. Everyone else came filing in after us, confused and tired. Riley started to shout that someone had kicked in the door, but my parents wouldn't hear it and said the weather must have done it. After all, it was stormy that night. Riley and I disagreed. It wasn't that stormy, and the nails that held the chain to the wall had been ripped nearly out of the wall. The doorknob was messed up. It wasn't the weather. A couple more weeks passed, and we're dealing with the same shit. Fire extinguishers going missing, doors getting hammered on, our dog losing her fucking shit every night. The final straw for my dad? My stoner-ass brother took a couple of his friends out to my van in the middle of the night to smoke. Our driveway was fairly long and my van was parked at the very end. It needed to be fixed up, so better to have it out of the way. There was still driveway to spare as it was long and very, very wide. Riley said they heard the truck, but just assumed it had stopped at the stop sign. But then there was gunfire. We're talking sprays of bullets. And instead of ducking for cover, the dumbass busts out of his van with his friends just in time for the shooter to jump back in his truck and the driver to peel out. Well, my dad sure as hell believes this now. Instead of calling the cops, he called Jimmy and asked him if he knew anyone with a truck that matched the description my brother provided. And when he said yes, it all clicked into place. You see, Jimmy's dad was real pissed his son went to work for the competition. He took it as a personal attack that my dad had accepted Jimmy with open arms, and he was willing to do what it took to get Jimmy to quit or convince my dad to fire him. Instead, my dad hatched a plan. He and Jimmy spent days shoving long nails into a thick rope. They covered the windows. They stocked the barn in the house with provisions. They sent the rest of us away for Thanksgiving and watched. The plan was simple. They assumed that since we were being watched, Jimmy's dad would think we had all gone off for the holidays. He'd probably try to break in while we were away. And then, when he did, he would find my dad waiting for him, gun in hand. And if he managed to get away, that's when Jimmy, who had been forced to wait in the barn, would pull the nail-riddled rope across the street and bust their tires. But no one ever showed. You see, Jimmy decided to go back to his dad. Told him so. Even went as far as to make copies of all of our invoices. And since he had given some to his old man, the guy decided to leave us alone. But Jimmy didn't leave right away. No, he had plans. Plans that entailed trapping a 17-year-old girl in her room. Plans that involved betraying his wife. Plans that involved betraying the man who had taken him in. Now, he never got far with me, but he did manage to steal half of our clients and send us back into a financial tailspin. Like father, like son. So Jim, let's not meet. You wouldn't like it very much. Some backstory before I begin. These events started when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade and ended during the fall of 2015. I'm a 21-year-old female living in Canada. When I was in elementary school, I was friends with a girl named Jessica. We had a group of 5 or 6 girls that we always played with. Jessica's parents were divorced, and I often went over to her dad's house after school because they had a trampoline and a slide. Her dad was a totally normal dude. His name was Richard, and he held a job as a pilot, which is definitely a job that requires mental stability. Jessica came over to my house as well, and her dad would always come pick her up after the play date, so he was familiar with where I lived. In I think 2nd or 3rd grade, Jessica moved away to live with her mom. I didn't fully understand what was going on as a child, and I still don't know what happened, but something had gone wrong with her father. We didn't hear much from Jessica, but around her birthday the following year, Richard invited our group of girls over for a surprise birthday party. We arrived at the party and were waiting for Jessica so we could surprise her, but Jessica never showed up. We were just hanging out with her dad for a while. As a child, this didn't seem as weird as it does to me now. When our parents picked us up, we obviously told them what happened, and we didn't hang out with Jessica or Richard again. After that, some of the girls started receiving presents from Richard at their houses. I never received them, but my mother told me about it years later. The presents usually consisted of cheap jewelry and notes. I have no idea what the notes said, but I'm not sure that I want to. After this, Richard goes away. My mom later told me he was in a mental institution. Years go by, and I completely forget about the whole situation. Then, in the winter of 2013, I was out of town for a cheer competition. I was scrolling through Facebook one night when all of a sudden, a new group chat popped up with 5 girls from my elementary school. I had not kept in touch with any of them, so this was weird. The chat was about how they had received messages from Richard on Facebook. I checked the other folder of my Facebook messages, and sure enough, I had some too. I had a variety of messages that did not make a lot of sense, including some strange poems. Many of the messages were descriptions of dreams he had had about me. Though some of them were nonsense, others were understandable enough to come across as sexually/violently threatening. I don't feel comfortable sharing some of the more explicit messages, but here are a couple of the shorter and less scary messages. Hi, little girl from not long ago, pristine of pristineness. I want you, I want you, I want you. We're gonna have planets to go to someday, provided you don't melt them first. I'm so proud of you. Stay happy, and I haven't found a way to keep you all off my mind. I can't see the planets till I make you all mine. You're just so rough, and oh, just so fine. As if I'm there, my love's for you I share, it's so indefinite, for it is all I care about you, that I only care. Oh my goodness, you're all my whipping cream containers. I clicked on Richard's Facebook profile, and his whole profile was dedicated to us 5 girls. He didn't have any friends added, so clearly nobody had seen it. Unfortunately, we didn't have very good security settings on Facebook. He had saved dozens of photos of us and then reposted them with nonsensical and inappropriate captions. The captions ranged from essays about his love for us to a one-sentence caption that simply said, "She is so ugly." Here are some of the shorter photo captions. Emily, hopefully and not too soon, I'm gonna find out you're YXX8511, and I'm gonna show up as a man that knocks on your front doorstep and bite your bottom lip off before you can say a word. Sierra, because my initial euphoria turns into sunken depression when I realize that there's nothing I can do about anything beside you because you're inside me and I can't get you out of my mind. I love you so much. Melissa, can I paint your picture, and I want to lift you around to see how heavy you are, and we'll go for a drive on Hollywood Drive with the windows rolled down so we can get a crystal clear view. Fucking give it up like as if I'm gonna pretend I like it. Besides, you're just yanking on my strings, cause time after time, it's always the same common denominator, which I noticed how come you all pluck your eyebrows, but I do pretend I have favorite things, but in reality, I don't need them, and I'm a good liar because I have a criminal mind like yours. We were all freshly 18 at the time and didn't know what to do, so our moms contacted the RCMP. They told us not to block Richard on Facebook, but not to reply to the messages as they could be used as evidence. He continued to send us messages every single day, and we shared the screenshots with each other in the group chat and sent them off to the RCMP. He had several different Facebook accounts that were all variations of his name, along with one randomly named Esteban. One of the girls got in touch with Jessica to find out if she still had contact with her father. She only saw him on supervised visits every once in a while. She was very embarrassed and apologized a lot. She was a super sweet girl, and obviously none of us were upset at her in any way. Eventually, Richard was charged with 5 counts of criminal harassment. He pled guilty and went to jail for around 5 months. When he got out, there was still a no-contact order in place, meaning that he could not contact any of us girls or come within a certain radius of our homes. He was not allowed to use the internet either. I'm not sure how all this worked, but this is what the constable handling the case told me. However, not surprisingly, he started contacting us on Facebook again. He went back to jail for breaching his probation. It was the summer of 2015, and he got out again. I started receiving more messages. I immediately wrote on the group chat to see if the other girls had gotten anything. They hadn't. It was just me. I immediately contacted the police. It seems they had forgotten to include my name on the no contact order. He knew not to contact the other girls, but thought that it was still safe for him to contact me. This time things got worse. I had just started working at a new job, and being the idiot that I am, I had my workplace public on my Facebook profile. One day, I came into work and there was a package waiting for me. I was obviously confused because I would never order something to be delivered to my work. I opened it up with my managers and there was weed inside along with a disc and encryption software on it. He had mailed me weed to my work. I knew immediately that this was him and awkwardly explained the situation to my managers, who thought it was hilarious. The security in the office tower was alerted and given a photo of him. They began walking me to my bus stop after my shifts. It was scary knowing that he knew where I worked. At this point, I hadn't seen Richard in years, but it was clear that he was mentally unwell. I had absolutely no idea what he was capable of or what his motives were. The RCMP did not seem to take this case very seriously, and they moved very slowly, passing the case around to various officers. Meanwhile, I was terrified. I could hardly walk down the street at night without freaking out. Every time somebody knocked on the door while I was home alone, I would drop whatever I was doing and hide under the kitchen counters. I had not moved since I was a child, so it was very possible that he remembered where I lived. The packages kept coming. I received more weed in several different forms, including cookies, what appeared to be cocaine, and a key to his apartment along with some miscellaneous items. I opened all of the packages at the police station. One of the packages included a USB stick with a bunch of audio recordings on them, but I decided it was better for me not to listen to them. The return address on the packages was to a random P.O. box in another city that did not belong to Richard, and no fingerprints were found on the packages. During all of this, the Facebook messages remained constant. Luckily, in one of the messages, he informed me that he had sent me drugs and the key along with his home address. This confirmed that the packages were from him. He was charged again. I received a subpoena in the mail to appear as a witness in court. However, he once again pled guilty and I never got to go to court. I was actually a bit disappointed, as I thought seeing him in person would provide me with some sort of closure. He is still locked up somewhere as I'm writing this, but I still get scared walking at night or when somebody knocks on the door. The police provided me zero information on where he was being held or when he would be released. I feel like I'm just waiting for the day that he will contact me again. It seems as if every time I think it's over, it isn't. If I do hear from him again, I'll be sure to post an update. The situation could have been a lot worse. As far as I know, he did not physically follow me around or anything. I strongly encourage you all to make sure your Facebook privacy settings are as private as possible. Ignore the dramatic title. I'm not sure how to title it without being dramatic or giving away the let's not meet part. I live about 20 miles from the city in which I work. I live out in the country, and about a short walking distance from my house is a highway, and on the corner is a 24/7 gas station. Last week, Saturday night, I went by there right before midnight to grab some Cajun peanuts. I see one car parked on the side, which is normal, usually just a guy working and rarely any customers at this time. Do you ever feel this dread overcome you? Like you know something is wrong? Well, I walk in and don't see anyone. Nobody behind the counter or in the store. So I take my time and assume they are in the bathroom or step to the back of the store. Surely they heard the chime on the door when I came in. I'm feeling weird and uncomfortable, so I wait a minute even though it seemed like forever. So I call out, "Anyone here?" I wait a minute more and put the peanuts down and walk out the door. I checked the car parked on the side and there wasn't anything troubling. I even glanced on the back side of the store and there was nobody. I'm pretty uncomfortable, so I just call the police. They show up 10 to 15 minutes later, but it really did feel like an hour, and they search the place. They find the cashier dead in the men's bathroom, beaten to death. They called him back up and asked me to recap what I experienced, and then I went home. That ain't even the fucked up part. As I get home and my dog is in the front yard pissing and just staring at me, my front door is cracked open. My heart is racing, so I grab my dog and head back to the gas station and let the police know. They send one of the guys to search my house. Nothing is stolen or out of place, but there was sign of forced entry. So this was last week, and about 5 hours ago, I get a call from my brother who works for the county sheriff's office. Supposedly, they pulled the camera footage, and about 10 minutes before I walked into the store, someone came in, started punching on the cashier, and then dragging him into the bathroom. On the footage, you can see me walk in and look around and call out, and then you can see me walk out and check the car, walk to my vehicle, and make a call. About the time I'm in the vehicle, the alleged murderer walks out of the bathroom and sneaks out the back door, and before leaving the view of camera, he takes off in the general direction of my house. Fortunately, my wife was out with some friends watching Beauty and the Beast, but I'm convinced that I missed a murderer at the gas station, and then he broke into my house. This week, I had a new security system installed alongside a new front door, but I'm pretty sure whoever did this is still out there. I love listening to scary stories and figured it's time to maybe share some of my own creepy encounters. A bit of a warning, this is going to be long. Throughout my life, I've experienced many unusual and often unpleasant situations. For privacy reasons, I don't want to give away too much information about myself, but I will say that I'm a 20-year-old girl now living in Ireland, where I have lived for over 5 years. I grew up in a small Eastern European country, of which about 40% are Russian, and am of Russian descent. Even though most everyone in my country spoke fluent Russian and much of the population had Russian relatives, ethnic tensions in the country were high. It wasn't uncommon for you to receive a lower salary or worse treatment in shops and other public places if the place was run by natives. It is because of this that I believe I was singled out as a target in this particular story, that and my feeble appearance, as I have always been quite short and skinny. My neighborhood, like any other, consisted of many blocks of Soviet apartments, remnants of the USSR, rotting away, but nevertheless housing hundreds of people. It was a good enough neighborhood, all things considered, and I would not have called my family particularly poor. However, the building we lived in was rather bleak. The hallways were always dark, stank of piss or sometimes other bodily excretions. The building was quite tall and had an old, creaky elevator which smelled no better than the hallway itself. It often got stuck or broke. This, however, was still more favorable than climbing even the darker sets of stairs, which often had homeless people sleeping on them, or groups of teenagers gathering to do drugs. The layout of the place is unimportant, however. I believe this description will set the scene. After a year or two of living in this building, the little occurrences aside from stumbling upon the occasional stoner with a knife trying to rob me for drug money, or a girl passed out in front of my apartment, I started to notice two native kids hanging around the neighborhood, a girl and a boy. At first, they never spoke to me, and I paid little mind to them. However, I would often notice them staring at me as I passed by or from a distance as I played with other neighborhood kids. These kids were weird, to say the least. They spoke a limited amount of Russian and isolated themselves from everyone else, just watching me. Despite them being very similar looking, nobody knew if they were related or just two weirdos living in my building who found each other, but I remember always assuming they were brother and sister. After a while of the not-so-casual staring, they began to harass me on my walk home, tease me, push me, and generally attempt to get on my nerves with what little Russian insults they knew. I had rather thick skin, so this didn't bother me too much. I would either completely ignore them or fight back with what I thought were rather witty comebacks, but these kids were relentless. I began to wonder why they decided to randomly pick on me, as I never said a word to them before and had never really paid them any significant amount of attention, but decided to settle for the "they're just a bit weird" explanation. Nevertheless, this is all just teasing, right? Kids being kids. One day on my walk home, the strange duo were on my heels as usual, the boy making some crude comments about my nationality and how I should go back home to Russia, as well as other unrelated insults, while the girls snorted and laughed their ass off. I did my best to ignore their behavior, not feeling in the mood to dignify them with a clever comeback this time. However, it became increasingly difficult as in frustration, the two suddenly became more aggressive than usual. All the other times this went on, they would just give up and leave me alone after a while, walking in the other direction. But this time, to my surprise, they followed me into my building and into the poorly lit, stinky hallway. Still ignoring them, I pressed the button for the elevator when I felt the boy roughly grab me from behind. I was in shock. The girl joined him, bending my arm in an incredibly uncomfortable position behind my back. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed at them, as they began attempting to drag me to the almost black staircase, telling me to shut the fuck up. I struggled, of course, not understanding what had gotten into these two. I mean, I knew they were weird, but this was something else. This didn't feel like childhood bullies or kids being kids. I believe these two had something sinister on their minds. As I struggled against their grip, trying to break my way free and towards the elevator that now arrived onto the ground floor, a middle-aged woman walked into the hallway. A look of confusion at the sight before her on her face, she asked, "Is anyone going up?" Desperately, I breathed, "I am, please!" Reaching for the elevator, only to hear the guy snarl, "You're not going anywhere." To my surprise, despite the pure desperation in my voice and the fact that I was fighting two seemingly older kids trying to drag me away, the woman didn't offer any help, didn't give out to the two kids, didn't even ask what the heck was going on, just shrugged her shoulders and walked into the elevator. What was going through her head still makes me curious, but I'm assuming this was probably due to assuming this was nothing serious because of our age. Or maybe her not wanting to get involved any more than she already had in order to avoid trouble. After all, our neighborhood wasn't the safest, and it's best to just stay out of trouble if you can. At this point, I became surged with adrenaline, partly from my desire to get out of that elevator and away from these two, and partly from anger at the refusal to help me. It's amazing what the human body can do when faced with a potentially dangerous situation. Using all of my strength, I whipped around and slammed the boy harshly into the wall behind me, immediately making both the girl and boy let go of me. I could tell that the two of them were as shocked as I was at what had just happened. As I said, I was a small girl, but it felt as though someone else had possessed me at that moment, as if I wasn't even in control of my actions. All I knew is that I had to get away. As soon as I was let go, I ran to the elevator and managed to make it inside before the door closed. The last thing I remember seeing before the doors slammed shut and we took off was the girl's shocked expression as she stared at me, surprised of what I was capable of. The lady in the elevator didn't say a word to me. I wish I could say it ended there. A few days later, I was confident in my ability to defend myself against those two, and was pretty sure they would not attempt to attack me again, or even go near me. My relief, however, was short-lived. A friend of mine knocked on the door at the usual time I would go out on a free day, asking me to hang out. I of course excitedly agreed, and as soon as I was ready, we headed out into the elevator. As previously mentioned, the elevator itself was not all that sturdy and easily broke down. But that's not the only thing that made it extremely unsafe. If you were a child and were taking the elevator alone, especially in a building as tall as ours where there were many floors, you never knew what the person that got on with you turned out to be and what they could do to you, especially if the elevator did get stuck. This wasn't something that happened so often, of course, that it prevented us from using it and taking the dreaded stairs. We got on without a worry in the world and pressed the button for the ground floor and began chatting about nothing in particular. About 4 floors down, the elevator stopped, letting on a burly, middle-aged man. Just the sight of him was intimidating. He had a sunken face, long, black, greasy hair, a curly beard, sweat stains under his arms, and his belly was so big it took up most of the room in the tiny elevator, pushing my friend and I into a corner. We fell silent. At first, he said nothing, just stared at the two of us as the elevator doors closed. I could tell that, much like myself, my friend had an uneasy feeling about him and what his intentions with us were. Then, in a deep, hoarse voice, he says slowly and calmly, "You think you're so tough, don't you?" It was more of a statement than a question, and I could tell it was directed at me. Suddenly, he pressed the elevator's stop button, screeching it to a halt, reaching out and grabbed me by the fringe. He pinned me against the wall of the elevator, still holding on to my fringe, and began to pull up. I could feel some strands of my hair ripping out of my skull as I was being lifted slightly. However, not enough for my feet to lose contact with the ground. I squealed in pain as my friend watched in shock, cowering further into the corner, unable to do anything. "I can be tough too," he sneered in a slightly sarcastic tone. I began to try to make him let go of my hair, but to no avail. The more I moved, the more of my fringe ripped out, and the more painful it became, so I just stopped struggling and attempted to stand up on my tippy toes as much as I could to release the tension he put on my hair. "You think it's so funny to hurt my son." For a second, I had no idea what he was going on about. But then I realized. The boy I slammed against the wall in an attempt to get away must have told his parents what happened, most likely neglecting to include the fact that he attacked me first. Or maybe he did and his father just didn't give a shit. He didn't seem like a very reasonable man after all. I know what floor you live on. If you ever touch my son again, I will put a knife through your throat in this fucking elevator. Do you understand me? He hissed at me. Before I could respond, the elevator began to move again. Someone must have called it to another floor. He narrowed his eyes at me and let go of my hair, standing back and acting as if nothing happened, as we stopped and another person got on a few floors down. The rest of the ride down was spent in silence. I don't know what was scarier, the fact that this clearly insane man was threatening my life, or the fact that his equally loopy son stalked me without my knowledge to find out what floor I lived on and what my routine was, just so he could get his psycho dad to threaten me. And for what? My friend and I tried not to speak about it again, but whenever I saw those two kids again, they just kept their distance as they have before, grinning at me. Apologies since this is a long post, but I just need to get this off my chest. I'll start off by saying I'm a 24-year-old straight Asian male. This will be important later on in the story. But 2 years ago, I was extremely depressed. I smoked a lot of weed, antisocial, and suicidal. Anyway, I quit my job and decided to try a new city, thinking that would help with my depression and suicidal tendencies. So I got in contact with my uncle, who is gay, and he graciously decided to help me out. So shortly after, I moved in with him and his boyfriend. They were in their 50s and had a 3-bedroom apartment with an empty room that they let me use. I found a job, started paying rent. Everything was fine at first, all but his boyfriend, Kevin. Before I continue, I want you to know that my uncle desperately tried to hide his sexuality. Even though my entire family knew he was gay, but none of us cared, he's family and we're all just a little too busy with our own lives to really care. My uncle was not the issue here, it was Kevin, his boyfriend. Kevin was 50-something years old and was overweight and just a weird person. You know those people you meet and straight away you notice something's just a little off about them? I wrote it off as him just being giddy and excited about having a new roommate. I should note that Kevin has a few health problems, like he's bipolar and he has thyroid problems, and a few other issues that I forgot about. He was also extremely childish. Some time had passed since I moved in, and that's when Kevin started to get a little too comfortable or confident, I'm not sure which, but he told me he was gay and he was in a relationship with my uncle, and told me not to tell my uncle he told me this, to which I abided by. I told him that I already knew along with my family and not to worry. A few days had passed and that's when it started. If we were sitting on the couch watching a movie or if he was just sitting anywhere near me, he would put his hand on my leg and start rubbing my leg, asking if it made me uncomfortable, to which I would say yes. He would very often take pictures of me without my consent and sometimes without me even knowing, so on and so forth. He did all this while my uncle wasn't around. I told him very sternly that I was straight and I have no interest in men and to cut it out or I would tell my uncle about everything he was doing. And, needless to say, it stopped for a time. I moved in with them when they had around 3 months left on their lease. After it ended, they decided to renew for another year with my name on the lease. In about 5 or 6 months after the lease renewal, Kevin and my uncle were having some issues. They would fight and argue a lot, typical relationship stuff. One day, it got really bad, and they broke up, and my uncle said he was moving out, but he would still pay his portion of the rent since his name was still attached to the lease contract, and he would come by regularly to check up on me, and I just said, okay. I didn't ask any questions, and I just let it go since he said he was going to still pay his third for rent. After my uncle moved out, that's when things really started to get creepy. He would tell me how he wished I was his son and how he would have loved to have me as a baby, and right after he would flirt with me by saying I'm cute and he found me attractive, and that he had a fetish for Asian men. Sometimes he would just be staring at me. If I caught him looking, he would not look away like any normal person would. He would continue to stare. I mean, it was really making me feel uneasy. I could go on, but I don't want to bore you with the details. Let's just say this creep was heavily flirting and making subtle advancements even though I would tell him to stop and reminding him I'm straight. We've actually been in many fights because of this. It was all verbal, non-physical, then shortly after he would start crying and throwing tantrums. It seriously felt like I was dealing with a 5-year-old child. This went on for a little while until the lease was coming to an end, and there was about a month and a half left on the lease, and I told Kevin I was getting my own place and he should do the same. That's when shit hit the fan. I would notice my boxers would go missing, shirts would disappear. I've even caught him sneaking into my room while I was asleep. He even told me that he jerks off thinking about me. Now, you're probably thinking, why didn't I tell anyone about this? And the truth is, I was kind of embarrassed by this whole situation. I mean, come on, think about it. A 23-year-old can't handle a 50-something-year-old gay man hitting on him? Just sounds like a bad sitcom. I eventually found an apartment, and even though there was a few weeks left on my current lease, I said screw it and started moving out. I didn't have much, just a bed, a dresser, TV, and my clothes. My friend was nice enough to let me use his truck to get my things moved to my new place. It was on moving day when I noticed Kevin was gone. I didn't know where he went, and I really didn't care, but something urged me to check his room. This whole time, I never went into his room because I respect people's privacy and their space, but I don't know, something just told me to go into his room, so I went in and I saw it. I seriously can't make this shit up, and I'm completely honest when I say this, but I saw a little shrine with all my belongings that went missing, and even garbage I threw away months ago. For instance, my old toothbrush, empty soda bottles, you get the idea. There, along with all my missing boxers, shirts, and pictures. Oh god, the pictures. This creep had pictures of me sleeping, and there were also pictures of me at work and a few of me naked in the shower, and there were hundreds, literally hundreds. That moment, I felt so violated, disgusted, angry, and for some reason, guilty. I searched his room for more creepy things. Thankfully, there were no more other than the shrine. I took everything and burned it out in some field and got the fuck out of there. Later that night, I was completely moved out, and Kevin probably came home to notice I was gone along with the shrine, and long story short, he went batshit crazy, texting me and calling me nonstop, making threats and sending me creepy perverted texts, to which I got a restraining order against him. It's been almost a year since I last heard from him. I don't know what he's up to now, and I really don't want to know. On a side note, if you've made it this far in this incredibly long and boring post, then I congratulate you, and wholeheartedly thank you for reading. I just felt the need to get this story out there since it's been bothering me for a while, in hopes to move on. Again, thank you for reading.